The global energy market has just been hit with a shockwave so powerful that it erased nearly $2 trillion from the American stock market in a single week. But that financial chaos is merely a symptom of a much more dangerous condition. Deep in the Persian Gulf, on a small sliver of land called Kharg Island, the United States has just crossed a line that military strategists have spent decades trying not to even approach. And the question now isn't just about oil prices or market fluctuations. The question is whether the world is about to witness the total collapse of the global energy system, and whether the Strait of Hormuz, the most important waterway you've never thought about, is about to become a war zone. To understand why this moment is so terrifyingly significant, you have to understand what Kharg Island actually represents. It's not just another military target. It's not just another piece of territory. Kharg Island is the cardiovascular system of the Iranian economy. When you look at satellite images of this small island off Iran's coast, you're not looking at rocks and sand. You're looking at the single point where approximately 90% of Iran's crude oil exports leave the country. Massive storage tanks, sprawling terminal facilities, intricate loading systems that can handle up to 7 million barrels of oil per day, all of it concentrated on one small piece of land that is now smoking ruins. But here's what makes this attack historically significant and potentially catastrophic. When the United States military decided to strike Kharg Island, they weren't just attacking a military installation. They were targeting the economic lifeblood of a nation. And there's a term for that in geopolitical strategy. It's called escalation dominance taken to its most dangerous extreme. It's the kind of move that signals to an adversary that nothing is off the table, that their most vital national assets are now in the crosshairs. Now, you need to understand the strategic importance of this island in practical terms. Kharg Island isn't just where oil is stored. It's where Iranian crude makes the transition from land to sea. The infrastructure there represents decades of investment, billions of dollars in specialized equipment, and the employment of thousands of people. More importantly, it represents the physical manifestation of Iran's ability to participate in the global economy. Without Kharg Island operating at full capacity, Iran's oil exports don't just decrease, they effectively stop. But the United States didn't just wake up one morning and decide to bomb this facility. This attack is the culmination of a tension that has been building for months, years, really decades. And to understand why we're here, you have to look at what was happening in the days leading up to this strike. Just hours before the bombs fell on Kharg Island, the streets of Iran were filled with hundreds of thousands of people. It was Quds Day, the annual demonstration of support for Palestine that has become a fixture in the Iranian political calendar. But this year was different. This year, the leaders of Iran weren't addressing the crowds from behind bulletproof glass or from fortified positions. They were in the streets. They were taking selfies with ordinary citizens. They were walking through crowds without visible security details. The message being sent was unmistakable. Just days earlier, the U.S. Defense Secretary had publicly stated that Iranian leadership had gone underground, that they were hiding from the possibility of American strikes. And then, in a coordinated show of defiance, every major Iranian political figure emerged into the open. The president, the foreign minister, senior military commanders, all of them visible, accessible, and sending a clear signal to Washington that fear was not part of the Iranian calculation. This is the context that makes the strike on Kharg Island so significant. This wasn't a response to an immediate threat. This was a calculated decision to escalate a conflict at the precise moment when Iran was demonstrating its confidence and its popular support. Now let's talk about what actually happened in the hours following that strike, because the military situation is far more complex than simple retaliation. According to reports from multiple sources, including the Wall Street Journal, Iranian missiles didn't just fly toward Israel. They struck American assets directly. At the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, 5 American refueling aircraft were damaged in an Iranian ballistic missile attack. These aren't small planes. These are massive tanker aircraft essential for extending the range of American combat operations in the region. And they were hit while parked on a base that was supposed to be secure. In Tel Aviv, the situation was even more dramatic. Video footage shows the skyline covered in smoke after an Iranian missile penetrated the city's air defense systems and struck a warehouse complex. Sirens wailing, emergency responders rushing to the scene, civilians running for shelter. This is the reality that has returned to Israeli cities after months of relative calm. But here's where the situation becomes truly dangerous from a strategic perspective. The United States military operates on a doctrine of overwhelming response. When American assets are attacked, the expectation is that the response will be disproportionate, designed to deter future attacks by demonstrating that the cost of striking the United States is simply too high to contemplate. But what happens when the adversary has already calculated that cost and decided they're willing to pay it? This is the strategic dilemma now facing American planners. Iran has demonstrated that it can reach American bases throughout the region. It has demonstrated that its missiles can penetrate Israeli air defense systems. And it has demonstrated that its leadership is willing to appear in public, essentially daring the United States to target them directly. But the strike on Kharg Island changes the calculation in ways that extend far beyond immediate military consequences. To understand why, you have to think about the global oil market not as an abstract economic concept, but as a physical system with vulnerable points. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those points. At its narrowest, this waterway is just 21 miles wide. Yet through that narrow channel flows approximately 20% of the world's oil. Every day, tankers carrying about 17 million barrels of crude oil pass through these waters. And Iran has spent decades preparing for the possibility that it might need to close that strait. Think about what that would mean. If Iran follows through on its threats, and it has repeatedly stated that if its oil cannot leave the region, no one's oil will leave, then the global economy faces a shock unlike anything seen since the 1970s. Oil prices wouldn't just rise. They would spike to levels that would make the 2008 crisis look like a minor adjustment. Analysts are already talking about $150 per barrel as a conservative estimate. Some projections go much higher. But here's what most people don't understand about oil shocks. They don't just affect the price at the pump. They affect everything. Every product you buy that is shipped to a store, its price depends on transportation costs. Every food item that isn't grown locally, its price depends on fuel for farming and shipping. Every manufacturing input that crosses borders, its cost depends on oil. A sustained spike in oil prices doesn't just mean expensive gasoline. It means broad inflation across every sector of the economy. It means economic slowdown. It means the kind of stagflation that central bankers have nightmares about. And this is happening at a moment when the American economy was already showing signs of fragility. The stock market losses you're hearing about, nearly $2 trillion wiped from the S&P 500 alone, these aren't just numbers on a screen. They represent retirement accounts losing value, institutional investors pulling back, consumer confidence eroding. The market was already nervous about inflation, about interest rates, about global growth. Now it has to digest the possibility of a sustained conflict in the world's most important oil-producing region. But let's go deeper into what the attack on Kharg Island actually means for Iran's ability to continue fighting. The infrastructure on that island is not easily replaced. The specialized equipment required to load supertankers, the storage tanks designed to hold millions of barrels of crude, the pipelines that connect the island to the mainland, all of it represents years of engineering and construction. If these facilities are significantly damaged, Iran's oil exports don't just pause. They could be reduced by half or more for months or even years. And here's where the economic warfare aspect becomes clear. Iran's government depends on oil revenue to function. Without that revenue, its ability to fund military operations, to support allied groups throughout the region, to maintain the basic services that keep the population content, all of this becomes dramatically more difficult. The United States has effectively attacked the Iranian economy at its most vulnerable point. But there's a problem with this strategy. It assumes that Iran will simply accept the economic damage and seek de-escalation. And that assumption may be fatally flawed. Consider what Iran has done in the hours since the attack. It hasn't just fired missiles at American bases and Israeli cities. It has sent a clear message about its willingness to escalate beyond the immediate battlefield. The permission granted to Indian LPG carriers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This isn't humanitarian concern. This is a signal that Iran controls the strait, that it can decide who passes and who doesn't, that it can calibrate the pressure it applies to the global economy. Think about this strategic logic here. Iran knows it cannot match American military power directly. It doesn't have the Navy to challenge the US fleet in open combat. It doesn't have the Air Force to establish dominance over the region. But it doesn't need any of that. It only needs to control the strait. And it only needs to convince global markets that the risk of shipping oil through the Persian Gulf is simply too high. This is asymmetrical warfare applied to the global economy. Iran doesn't need to defeat the United States militarily. It only needs to make the cost of continued conflict unbearable for the international community. And the international community includes America's closest allies, countries that depend on stable oil prices and secure shipping lanes. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Because the situation isn't static and the range of possible outcomes is genuinely terrifying. Scenario 1, the conflict remains contained. Iran accepts the damage to Kharg Island as a cost of confrontation and focuses its retaliation on military targets. The United States and Israel continue their strikes against Iranian facilities, and Iran continues its missile attacks against regional bases. Oil prices remain elevated but stable, and the global economy absorbs the shock over time. This is the optimistic scenario, and it's already looking unlikely. Scenario 2. Iran follows through on its threats to close the Strait of Hormuz. This would be an immediate and dramatic escalation. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, would have to respond. The resulting naval conflict would be the largest since World War II. Every tanker transiting the strait would become a potential target. Insurance rates for shipping would become prohibitive. Oil prices would spike to levels that would trigger a global recession. This isn't just a military conflict anymore. This is economic warfare on a global scale. Scenario 3. The conflict draws in regional powers that have so far remained on the sidelines. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, all of them have oil infrastructure that could become targets. All of them have populations that could be inflamed by the conflict. All of them have strategic calculations that could shift dramatically depending on how events unfold. If Iranian missiles start hitting Saudi oil facilities, the calculus changes completely. And if Saudi Arabia is drawn into direct conflict with Iran, the entire region becomes a war zone. But there's a fourth scenario, one that strategists are discussing in quiet terms, and it involves the possibility that this conflict doesn't stay regional at all. Think about the global alliances at play. The United States has treaty obligations throughout the region. It has bases in multiple countries. It has naval assets that are now potentially in harm's way. If American ships are sunk, if American bases are overrun, if American soldiers die in large numbers, the political pressure for a massive response becomes overwhelming. And a massive response means strikes on Iranian territory that go far beyond Kharg Island. It means targeting the Iranian military command structure. It means potentially targeting Iranian leadership directly. And what does Iran do then? It has options that extend beyond the region. It has allied groups throughout the Middle East capable of attacking American interests. It has the ability to disrupt shipping far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. It has relationships with actors who might see this as an opportunity to strike at American targets elsewhere in the world. This is how regional conflicts become global crises, not through direct declarations of war, but through a cascade of escalating responses, each one justified by the previous action, each one making the next step more likely. Now, let's address the question that should be on everyone's mind. Why now? Why did the United States choose this moment to cross what Iran clearly considers a red line? The official explanation involves military necessity, that Kharg Island was being used to coordinate attacks on American forces, that the infrastructure there had become a legitimate military target. But there's more to it than that. There's a political dimension that can't be ignored. The American administration has been under intense pressure to demonstrate strength. The market losses we mentioned earlier aren't just economic data points. They're political liabilities. When the stock market drops $2 trillion, when voters see their retirement accounts shrinking, when businesses start pulling back on investment, the party in power pays a price. And with elections approaching, the pressure to show decisive action, to project strength, to demonstrate that the United States won't be pushed around, that pressure is immense. But here's the dangerous irony. The strike on Kharg Island may have been intended to demonstrate strength, but it has revealed vulnerability. It has shown that the United States feels compelled to escalate rather than de-escalate. It has shown that American options in the region are limited enough that targeting critical civilian infrastructure becomes a viable option. And it has shown that despite overwhelming military superiority, the United States cannot protect its regional allies from Iranian retaliation. Look at the evidence. American bases in Saudi Arabia have been hit. Israeli cities have been hit. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is now operating in an environment where every ship is a potential target. This isn't the posture of a nation in control of the situation. This is the posture of a nation reacting to events, trying to regain the initiative, hoping that escalation will lead to de-escalation rather than further escalation. And that's the fundamental danger of where we are right now. In a conventional conflict, there are clear thresholds, established rules of engagement, predictable patterns of escalation and de-escalation. But this isn't a conventional conflict. This is a confrontation between a conventional superpower and an adversary that has spent decades developing asymmetric capabilities. The rules that apply in conventional warfare don't necessarily apply here. The thresholds that would normally signal restraint don't function the same way. When Iran sends its leaders into the streets, it's not just showing confidence, it's demonstrating that the normal rules of political survival don't apply. When Iranian missiles hit American bases, it's not just a military strike, it's a message that American assets throughout the region are vulnerable. When the United States strikes Kharg Island, it's not just a military operation. It's an acknowledgement that economic warfare has become the primary battlefield. And the global economy, already fragile, already stressed by years of disruption and uncertainty, now has to absorb the reality that the energy system it depends on is no longer secure. This is the world we now inhabit. A world where a small island in the Persian Gulf becomes the flashpoint for a conflict that could reshape the global order. A world where oil prices are determined not by supply and demand, but by missile strikes and naval deployments. A world where the difference between regional conflict and global crisis is measured in degrees of escalation, not in fundamental differences of kind. The strike on Kharg Island has been called many things: a strategic necessity, a dangerous escalation, a calculated risk. But whatever you call it, one thing is clear. The world has crossed a threshold and there's no going back. The question now isn't whether there will be consequences. The question is whether those consequences can be contained before they consume everything in their path. This is Daily Report. Please let us know in the comments whether you found today's video informative or not. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to smash the bell icon so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Take good care of yourselves, and thank you for watching.